Cool.
So, hey, everybody. My name is Rob Carballo. Chris Mahoney is doing the screen share. We call ourselves True Motive / MediaMesh. A little background about us. I've been a stagehand for 25 years, and about a decade ago, after playing an alternate reality game and sort of DJing for each other through IRC, a radio station popped up in our world, and ever since then, I've had a pretty intense interest in it, running my own amateur radio station called Geek Beat Radio for a decade now. And so I'm a pretty aggressive use case. And so I've always trying to find, but I'm not a developer, and I've always been trying to find ways to make my life easier when I'm on air. There's nothing more aggravating than when you want to share something and you can't share it because you don't have an input or an output prepared. And I've been a slave to Sam Broadcaster and Icecast this entire time, but I was under the schedules of anyone who was willing to help me. But during the pandemic, I was able to get a job working in broadcast and VR stuff, and was trying to utilize Icecast to broadcast into VR. And we had some successes, and it was great. But in the end, that didn't really work out. That's fine. But Chris Mahoney and I have been friends for over a decade, and he began, as I collected all the pieces to the puzzle that for the problems I was trying to solve, and I presented them to Chris. It took him a long while, a lot of, yeah, that's cool, buddy, I'm busy right now. But eventually he did pick up on what I was trying to show him. And what I'm really enjoying about today is that I'm learning that we're on point with what we're trying to solve, because it matches up with what a lot of people here are talking about. We ended up going out and buying what do we get? Inputs.live and outputs.live. And that was really the base point of what I was trying to do. I was like, Chris, I want to make it so that whatever I want to bring in and whatever I want to send out is automatically ready to go, and we're ready for it, and there's no hurdle to jump on air. Well, I guess we can't listen to that song right now. I guess I can't send you that video file right now. And so of course, computers and the cloud becoming so powerful, it's opening a lot of opportunities for us that we maybe hadn't considered when we started on this journey. But now we're here, and our user interface, I don't know if Chris wants to get that far into it. I'm going to hand it over to Chris fairly quickly. But our user interface, there we go, it resembles a wireframe. And I see how that could be potentially confusing for some types of users, but we could solve that with skins. So we could do that. But I think the most interesting part of all this, which not too many people have discussed, it was glanced over at once, is video support. And before I stumble too far and don't have the technical vocabulary to keep up with explaining all this, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, but I may chime in if he has something that I can comment on.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, all right. So, without going into too much chatty Chris Mahoney talk, this is the MediaMesh graph that we've been working against since we started in about June of last year, investigating what Rob had said was basically a lot of technologies that web broadcasters are extremely used to, specifically Icecast, right? So Rob had been using Icecast for Geek Beat Radio for videos or audio streaming for so long that he was extremely used to it. But the back end was kind of hand wavy, right? Like an engineer in their most ideal situation doesn't have to worry about the underpinnings, right? And so you have a lot of this automation and playlist manipulation that I'm learning a lot about from this perspective today. it's been so many great talks. But what I've always wanted to do, especially with an API as powerful as Liquid Soap, is to create a visualization that users can manipulate, and leave all the details kind of behind this Liquid Soap script node, right? So we're definitely working toward Rob's demanding use case of being an existing broadcaster, right? Even if it's just audio right now, for the same reasons that people would want to use Liquid Soap or any tool in a world where we have video live streams as a thing, right? So the differences associated with what we're doing, focusing on video, is you definitely want the same playlist functionality and selectability from a local file system. It's amazing that there's built-in S3 protocol support for AWS. So we have, it's hidden in here, but we have a functional S3 media browser, which would mean you'd be able to basically drag and drop, say, a folder from your cloud storage that's configured in MediaMesh when you hopefully subscribe or run it. And you basically manage your own media library through what I'm learning is now existing tools, right? Things like Beats and Music Brains for filing huge amounts of audio, like Rob's 52-day playlist that he's yearning to put in the cloud, but we find the ideal way to do it. Video is interesting because it's so much more bandwidth intensive, processing intensive, and costly, right? So how do we properly scale this thing is one of the important things that we've been talking about. So just to go into detail about what we're actually looking at here, our goal, and this couldn't be possible without Liquid Soap's heavily documented API. I would implore everybody that works with Liquid Soap to just run Liquid Soap with the help flag. And you'll see that there's actually a bunch of functions in there to export the existing documentation as Markdown or as JSON, existing methods. And so what we're aiming to do is actually support as much of the feature set of Liquid Soap as we possibly can at an iterative fashion to support multi-user live stream generation. So if you think about this graph as my station currently, right? And I'm going to delete this free IPTV here so I don't accidentally sync a broadcast. But what you would see is you end up needing a single source at the end of the day. So in between, you would have possibly things like this switch, right? So this switch would take multiple video sources that are named here. So, source HLS1, or I'm just Rob, right? Rob coming in from.
I'm still ready to pop that up if you want, by the way.
Cool. Yeah. It would be. I think it'd be great at the end if it's possible. Or actually, once you stream into it, I could actually pull the output up. So one of the things that we absolutely are supporting next, now that we've basically, zoom in here. No, I won't. But
it's going now, Chris.
Oh, great. Cool. I'll bring it up. So we've got input.http, which is basically now in 2.x, like your go-to for any URL input. And the reason for that is twofold for us. Is one, it sits on input.ffmpeg. And the second point is that ffmpeg input will aggressively try and figure out the content type just based on the URL that you provided, right? So the actual script that's generated off of this graph by taking the source information, which is just the URL, the encoder settings, which I'm a huge fan of with using ffmpeg now, but you'd have the option to use others. So the Vorbis, the MP3, the Theoras, we want full support of all these things. Behind this is running Liquid Soap Full, which we built with OPAM. I would strongly suggest, if you want full featured liquid soap, to just get used to OPAM and exhaustively list all the plugins that you want to use, right? So you give the user the ability to select their specific encoder. And what's great is every time that you make a change to this graph, that multi-user, right? So eventually you think about this as collaborative, like a Google Doc. That ability is currently also hidden. But we're able to basically synchronize this graph as if it's a Google document, right? And so two users can come in and collaborate on this. And since with Matrix, which we're using as the backend, provides WebRTC audio, video, chat support, we can overlay the experience of Rob and I collaborating on this graph, which equates to a single Liquid script, which you would then publish out to the cloud as a version, right? And it's expected to run 24/7. So the next important node is obviously fallback to support. And that will be really interesting because you'll feed in multiple inputs. And I'll pull up the, let me see if Rob is sharing, then I'm probably going
to. I'll restart it right now, Chris. Stand
okay,
by.
Cool. So once it's published, this Liquid Soap script, we fully standardized. Sharing now. We fully standardized on Docker, which we had to do because we're running multiple concurrent systems in order to be able to do this, right? So we're making large use of SRT and simple real-time server, which is just an incredible ingest point. So what we're not doing, and actually in the docs for Liquid Soap was kind of warned against, was to lean heavily on the HTTP server support and the harbor support within Liquid Soap. We are using it, but it is sitting behind an ingest system that would utilize Docker Swarm and is easily scalable so that we don't, A, have people hack the planet on our Liquid Soap instance, but also to be able to scale wide at the ingest point and also at the viewer point, right? So this is basically, so this is Rob. He's running OBS and he's got some FFmpeg filters, which is a feature that I'm very well looking to support, is creating filter graphs. You have Rob, he's the host going through OBS. Yeah. The streamer ingest point is actually a forwarder that simply pulls in RTMP for us and spits out internally into our Docker network an HLS out. So input.http, you just simply feed it the HLS out URL and nothing else. There are no other parameters that we feed into the source besides that URL. With a fallback to theoretically a path to historical playlist in single calls. In radio, it would be the MP3 directory, and for us, it would be an AWS bucket with MP4s in it, for instance. For the sake of time and not being up until 5 a.m. yesterday preparing, we're output IceCast because that's what we're used to, and that is really where this whole discussion started, with Rob mentioning IceCast's scarce but possible video support. So for our purposes, it supports Theora and FLV and other formats as well, right? But there's no real clarity on performance in those cases, or a focus on the performance, which I'm really seeing from the Liquid Soap team. Is they're trying to support video the same way they support audio for so long, but in a fashion that it's usable, possibly at scale, right? It might be expensive, and that's where this comes in. So we'll be looking for partners and potential colleagues to work with, because right now Chris Mahoney is DevOps, and Chris Mahoney is generally a developer who reluctantly learned Docker and Ansible due to the great work of Liquid Soap. So I thank you guys for that. There's a lot of magic that happens there, but this is now well understood by us. So we have a Portainer instance that if I sit here and possibly can see it, I can come in here. I had never heard about Portainer before, but it took all the scary parts away about Docker. And
yeah, let me chime in, Chris, for a second, just to give you a little bit of props. Chris, I saw some people earlier, maybe a little scared of Docker. Hey, me too. But Chris has essentially automated it. So you just tell it what you need, and it just spins up all the instances for you, and then they're just there, splintered apart, doing little different jobs and speaking to each other, easing the pain for each one of them, because now they're only concentrated on certain tasks instead of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, like the OG server that we had, and of course I'm throwing these URLs out everywhere, right, on the call. But Portainer on our other instance is actually running an entire stack of Matrix home server. So there was a Docker compose file that we're able to run. The hardest part for me is always setting up a proxy and getting proper HTTPS support. Good luck with that, because every time I do it, I relearn. But once you have that in place, which is also handled by Docker containers offered by those communities, we went from struggling to stand up AWS EC2 instances by hand to just simply develop our work. And for me to share it with Rob and our lead designer, Danny, there was no easy solution to doing that because I wasn't looking at automating into Docker. So now at this point, I'm literally not scared to just take one of these, like my front end. Here's this is running locally, but I can take this front end and this is fine. I can go redeploy that later. So I just deleted it. And I can do that with full confidence that I'll be able to rebuild it from the image that I put in Docker Hub.
Chris, do you want to address, there's been a couple of people talking,
okay,
if I understand correctly, about how this is great until you want to change something.
Yes.
Can you address how we potentially have solved that problem for ourselves?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting, and I'll look to some of the advanced users and probably the two experts, Sam and Romain, we have here in the near future. We're interfacing directly with Liquid Soap via Telnet for commands that would potentially run interactively from this interface. So for right now, I would hypothetically build this graph. It's validated, and then I publish it as a version, right? That would go out to a Liquid Soap instance that's demonized and would just run indefinitely. The thing that we are about to deep dive into and understand is our ability to create and manage dynamic sources, which sounds like it's a recent focus. There may be some difficulty with keeping the demonized server running with a significant change to the script, for example. But one of the things that kind of saves us there is a built-in lag that we can provide over at this ingest point that's using a simple real-time server, because at that point we can, if there's going to be a transition to a new phase of the script, then we can adjust the server that's taking the input to start to create this lag that will allow Liquid Soap to drop and come back. And all of the users on the other side, where I have this magic, are actually just connecting to another one of these the other way out. So the goal is to keep a buffer outside of the Liquid Soap scope, so that we're able to roll into new versions without disrupting the user base. So that's a great question. Were there any others? I can't see the chat on my computer, so thanks, Rob.
Yeah, no. I mean, everything else you've kind of been following along. Repeat your question if we missed it, please. But I think that was the major one.
Yeah, one of the things that I really want to point out is our insistence on right now. This is a configuration tool to allow you to create. So, you're seeing this, kind of lame right quit debugs screen. But what we actually have over here is, as we support various methods in Liquid Soap, we're bundling them under their input, encode, output, logic controls like switches and stuff, and then system that would also let you configure telnet ports. OSC is important, as Rob and I come from chiptune music background. I had started Boston 8-Bit, which is a music collective in Boston, and that's how Rob and I had met when he was doing Geek Beat Radio. And one of the things that's so important is to allow live music production and live VJ production to connect to this just as easily as Rob would with an OBS, right? So you select input, and we simplify all of the methods in the input and output categories in the API into as simply as we can. Rob is actually pushing for me to make this simpler, where you just ask what the user wants to do, right? Some of these terms are easily understandable to us. Some of them will not be, right? Because we're coming from a different.
I'll jump in and say that I feel like there is a developer slash complex user interface that we're developing here. But as I alluded to before, skins is what I'm imagining we will have for certain use cases. So you don't want to deal with all this. Maybe we'll have a way that you can have us configure it for you, and then we just give you a radio skin, a video podcast skin, anything like that. A training course skin for your Burger King franchise. Whatever you need, we can provide a skin for it, so that you don't have to be this developer with a wireframe Venn diagram driving yourself crazy.
And those skins, in terms of how we develop them, you can think of them as just templates, right? There's a simple same. You come in here, there would be templates that you could start from before you even get into the graph. And those templates would relate a use case, right? Say I'm a religious organization and I want to have my church live streamed, right? So it's a use case with a single, heavy bandwidth available user, the church, that's, the pastor that's talking. And then you have 100 people that want to watch, or you have 20,000 people if they want to watch, if you're in Texas and it's a mega church where I'm from. So those use cases become simple cards like this, and you solve not the problem of I want to manage my radio or my live stream, because this will output to YouTube Live, Facebook Live, right? And centralize the user's experience with their fans, but it will also give people that don't care and just want to do a webinar and present a PowerPoint, right? Or they want to run, ideally, something like we're doing today, right? Like my ideal use case would be, this thing is usable enough for, a business, an entry-level business person to come in here and put together something like Liquidshop in a fairly straightforward manner, just by selecting a webinar. And then the power user, say your developer that you have on staff that can configure these things more in detail for you, that's your power user ability, where you come into here. And so I won't really get into kind of our future focus is really on full support as much as possible of all of the inputs. Encodings are pretty much just done. But the inputs and outputs that all of us in web broadcasting for radio and live streaming would expect. And then also using our matrix backend to actually synchronize this graph between the users. So a matrix room would be associated with your graph, which is associated with your stream. And there's a component where you can chat and manage the production like you would in a physical location, right? with the audio, video, chat utilities in Matrix. So that's a small user group, 3 or 4 people using WebRTC, while at the same time being able to utilize the room as a messaging sync server between the users, which is really interesting. So someone in chat will only see, "Hi, I'm Rob." But really in chat, what's happening is there are document updates happening every time somebody deletes or moves or changes a source or what have you.
Which of course leads to potential file sharing.
Yes. And that's always a fun discussion, right? So,
I literally said to Chris, I had a Commodore VIC-20 and the tape would play and it went, can we do that with an IceCast server and send data?
Yeah.
Here we are.
The answer is yes, right? So when you had a Commodore 64 and you had cassette tapes and people would actually just copy the tapes to be able to copy a game, I had to say yes. And my next response was, we have data channels, right, in this media future that serve that same purpose. But Rob was not incorrect that we could easily use the audio portion of a Liquid Soap source stream as basically an acoustic modem, right? I had to agree that he had a point. So I want to leave the last couple of minutes for any questions about this. We're really interested to share it with the community because it's a great community. Thank you for this Liquid Shop and the opportunity to participate and share this work. This is the first time we're really putting it out in the public square. So we're honored to be in front of some of the most power users of Liquid Soap and happy to be part of the community.
Chris, one person did say, what would the license be and what is your tech stack?
Okay, so license, great question. That's going to be a very fun legal discussion and also business and marketing planning discussion, because one of the important things to me, the fact that this open source community exists and allows this product to come alive, is that we find the balance that good open source community members find, where they can provide back to the community in a powerful way, and then also turn this into something that has real business value, you know, and do it providing that business value and receiving, you know, income that we can then provide back to the community as a feedback loop. So that's a long way of saying I have no idea about the licensing, but it will be kind of worked out as we start toward releasing this. I'm thinking in the fall. In terms of the tech stack, underneath this, there's a great service called Amplication, which is in beta right now that we had signed up for. And what they allow you to do is actually, you create an application and it is synchronized with a GitHub repository. And what it does is builds an entire Docker container. This is what got me into Docker, that represents your data model that sits behind your system, right? So I can come in here and my thought is you have a media network that has multiple channels that have a single graph, right? And that's the organization in my head for now. But being able to manage server instances, streams, users, the whole 9 yards. This automatically deploys to a sandbox environment that allows you to actually interface with this via a REST API and GraphQL out of the box. So all of that's built in. If I come in here, here's the administration. So I'd be able to come in, see my users. It's very basic React admin instance. But what you also have is this is a full React app on the front end. So it's all heavy JavaScript and Node.js. But not only do you have this very boring admin interface, which I'm actually, having seen Azure cast, I'm starting to light up in terms of, this is as basic as you get. Having a good ability to manage something this complicated is extremely important, So if I go to API, what's great is Application also takes this data model that you've created, all in a visual environment, right? So I come in and fill out the entire data model visually. I don't write any schemas or scripts. And it gives you an entire Swagger-based API. So what's fantastic is I can authenticate against this and try it out, right? I can come in here. The hardest part of creating an API is to maintain it. So what this takes away is the need to actually have to. And I can come in, make a change to the data model that would normally be something, very, very difficult to do carefully in production, right? I can test it out in this sandbox environment and verify that I have access to all of the different pieces of the data model that I created in that visual interface, and it's all right here. So application, it seems to be a new thing. It pulled me straight into Docker. I'm never going back. And so Portainer, I just want to mention again, is the Docker orchestration system that we're using. And what it allowed us to do is you can actually use container templates. And there's quite an amazing support right here, the basic apps that it lets you install. I'm going to shut my mouth in a second. But there are other lists online of Docker container app templates people have compiled. And one of them is highly focused on home media library management. So it actually has built-in containers in here for music brains, beats, anything you could think of. Some things that you definitely don't want to run if you're looking into licensing and not getting sued by the big five, or the big three, whatever it is these days. But yeah, so I think two of the biggest lessons learned from this experience is not to underestimate the power of the support that FFmpeg provides in 2x under Liquid Soap. We're going to start banging against it really hard, and can't wait to, help iron out any bugs that show up in the Slack. And also, don't be afraid of Docker, right? Look at Docker Compose and look at Portainer. Portainer's free community edition, and it'll get you there. And there's enough resources online for Liquid Soap and web server setup that you might burn a weekend on it, but it's worth it because you won't spend hours and hours redeploying things, and you'll thank yourself later.
Chris, the one question that was just asked a moment ago and I guess we're at our time. Any name for the UI base for wireframing and somehow mapping between the wire diagram and the actual Liquid code?
Yeah. So can you repeat that, because I will have a good answer for that.
It's okay. Any name for the UI base for wireframing and somehow mapping between the wire diagram and the actual Liquid code.
Yeah. So we're so tentatively this whole thing is called MediaMesh, just based on the fact that the graph is a network, matrix sitting underneath it is a network, being able to collaborate with other users is an individual network collaboration, right? The actual output of this script or graph, whenever I make any change, is actually, I'll use a text through node, is coming out of this Liquid Soap output node. So right here, it looks like trash because it's sitting in it's just sitting in a single text box. But for instance, if I come in here and change this to source 1234, you'll see over here that this is immediately changing, and it's not a fully functional Liquid Soap script yet, because all I need to do is dynamically create the source instead of just spitting in this variable name. But what's coming out on the back end in the console right now, every time I make changes, is the actual Liquid Soap code changes are being spit out to the console. So the last mile that I'm going to connect, and Rob was asking me, is it something that's difficult? Is it something that we can show and is there anything stopping us? There isn't. It's really, we have the full output of the Liquid Soap script that this graph would generate, and then that would be published to a Liquid Soap agent, and that would coordinate with either IceCast or another output agent to get it out to a link and provide you with the stream output link. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, the other question is, could you show input mapping, or is like that not code as well? Yeah, I mean, I guess what we didn't really point out is that this functions. It's not just a planner.
Mm-hmm.
It actually functions.
Yeah. The last mile is really the mapping is one-to-one with these source IDs, and then the URL or the details for your input. So I have not video preview. I have the video test source, right? Color bars. So this would be a drop down that basically says I'm SMTP1 and it'd be color bars. The input mapping, and more importantly, the muxing of audio and video is something that's really important to us to be able to do. So I can take an MP3 of a DJ coming in, or a musical artist, and then I could have a visual artist come in on a separate video stream, and you could put those together into one, or switch between them.
Sorry, I opened my mic if that's okay with you, so I can ask the question directly, because the input mapping, of course, that's amazing. The fact that you can have the preview there in the interface. My question was more about how do you provide the Liquid Soap inputs as frames in there? Do you have a language that says, okay, input?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the video preview being in line?
No. I'm not really interested about the preview, but more about how you told your mesh, or whatever you call it. There's input.hls. It takes this kind of parameters, turn that into a frame there.
Oh, okay. So really it just boils. So that ends up being this output. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question, and I don't want to take away from. I can talk in the comments and definitely go into more detail. But in this simple example, the output is just this script here. And the only mapping I'm doing is I have a schema for each supported input that back here, it's probably, it is in here. If I just go schema, right? Here's the schema. I'm holding on to actual field definitions for each of the fields we support. So in case of input HTTP, I have a single unlabeled source. It defaults to this. Here's my default ID. What I'd ideally like to do is map this directly to what comes out of the AutoGen docs for Liquid Soap, which is what I started doing before I stopped myself.
That's exactly what I had in mind. So
exactly. My mind is right there. And I'm so glad that they built the tools into Liquid Soap to be able to export that information to use.
I'm pretty sure there, and Romain is jumping in, and you can take your time. Like I was supposed to be the next speaker, and I haven't. So it's good. I really love the idea of making all these possibilities in Liquid Soap available to non-Liquid Soap users, and I do actually meet this kind of issue sometimes. So if we could say, I don't know, I asked if you built yourself the wire interface.
Oh, it's called reet.js. So I'll put it in the chat. It's reet.js.org.
And then we do have to wrap up, Chris, because there's of course other speakers beyond.
Yeah, we're 10 minutes over. But no, I didn't write it, but I love visual graphs, so that's the easiest one I work with.
But really like the idea of making making it simple for people to just link the bricks all together for Liquid Soap is an amazing idea, and I look forward to whatever you're going to be publishing or contributing there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's our goal.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It was an honor to be here, and I look forward to listening and participating in the remaining talks.
Yeah, have a great day.
Have a great day.